Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Certified Forgotten, the only podcast that you are currently listening to that reviews horror films with 5 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. So, our niche is already pretty small, and I thought I would just refine it a little further with the concept that you're listening to it currently now. I am Matt Monagle. I am one half of your Matt hosts, and I am joined by my partner in crime, the guy who makes watching bad movies look easy, Matt Donato. How are you doing, friend?
Doing good. Would it be weird if I said I'm a quarter of the other half of the hosts, and there was just a quarter host somewhere that we didn't know about?
That would be well, it would be another Matt, so I suppose that's probably a little stranger. Yeah, yeah, I see what you're doing there. I don't like it, and I'm not going to acknowledge it, but I see it.
That's pretty much our relationship, so that's fine.
Yeah, we're in great shape. We're in mid episode shape already. So you're listening to Certified Forgotten. Every week we have an awesome guest. You've seen the guest in the podcast title, so I'm not really spoiling anything here. But I want to note before Matt does the introduction that this person is the person who is responsible for getting me into journalism. This is the first editor I ever had, the best editor I ever had, the person who plucked me out of obscurity off of a Craigslist post and launched what has been, at least for me, a pretty successful writing career. Those are some high stakes. That's a personal attachment that I have to the narrative that Matt's about to share. But Matt, please do the more traditional introduction for our guest today.
Sure, allow me to do the more generic template. You know this person as the editor of Certified Forgotten, one of the family, we'll say, and also recently published in Grim Magazine. To everything else Monagle said, this is Christine Makepeace.
Hello. I don't know how to really follow that intro, but thank you. All of the things that were just said, they're flattering and I guess truthful. So happy to be here.
They're entirely truthful. They're 100% truthful. I'm afraid.
Well, yes.
Um, the best and easiest praise is when it's true and accurate. And I know it's uncomfortable for you to take praise, but you're going to get more of it later on. So I'm sorry.
Thank you.
You
It is
have to.
uncomfortable, and that's one of the reasons why I really truly appreciate our relationship. You really do understand what I have trouble with, and you really just come up to meet
I
me
do.
halfway, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I try and take the edge off my compliments, which is an interesting statement. But that's I don't want to leave you hanging too much. Well, okay, Christine. So we've known each other. We've known each other for a minute, but and we've probably over the years have talked about some of this stuff. But for a lot of our listeners that may be familiar with your work because they're used to kind of the insights that you bring, kind of behind the scenes, the hidden stuff, right? Like they've seen the polish that you put on some of these pieces, but they may not know your history as a horror writer yourself. They may not know your history as an editor in chief and a publisher yourself. So I'm really excited for today's conversation, and I want to start off by going all the way back to the beginning and having you talk about your early days with the horror genre, like we do with all of our guests. We want to know, like, what were the films, what were those early childhood moments that sort of set the hook. So, what was that like for you? Like, what was your relationship to horror as a kid?
Yeah, so I always really was drawn to genre stuff, whether it be books, TV. I liked things with a horror or a sci-fi element. I think a lot of that has to do with my mom. She definitely skewed that way in what she showed me, even if it was just something like Labyrinth, which is heavily fantastical. She would show me that over, I guess, other more standard things that people in the 80s watched. So I had a good base pretty young. I watched Poltergeist way too young. I watched Nightmare on Elm Street way too young, and that stuff all just kind of stuck. And then I don't know. I kind of didn't care about movies for a long time. I went through a weird adolescent phase, and then all of a sudden, in my very early 20s, I went, "Oh my god, I love horror movies," and this full tilt ever since.
So, if you weren't caring about movies, let me ask, what was the thing that got you excited as a teenager?
Music, probably. I was
Mm.
very into music. I would follow bands around in my late teens, very early 20s. And that was kind of it. And I didn't really, I guess I didn't have room for movies, which is a strange thing. I also had an awful boyfriend at the time. And this is not a judgment on this genre at all. For like 5 years, the only movies I saw in the theater were like Halloween movies, like Michael Myers movies, which is fine, but that's a steady diet. Does not make a healthy person. So sometimes you need to diversify.
Yeah, it's really hard to kind of like overcome those, especially with art, the art that we connect to people and the styles of art that we connect to people. It can be super shitty trying to unpack how you feel about something and reclaim that from somebody you've been with that you had bad experiences with. Lord knows I've had plenty of people in my life who have showed me really good movies that I was like, oh, I hate you, but I like this. What do I do?
And also the opposite effect at times can be when you show someone a movie, like when I showed an ex-girlfriend Gremlins for the first time and she fell asleep in 15 minutes and I was like, "Oh, this is never
No.
going to work. This is great. This is my barometer. This is the end."
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I have a very complicated relationship with slasher films. If you ever want to get into that, so
I feel like that might be a different show.
it's a
That's
whole
not our
different
show. We
thing.
don't go that deep. Well, talk about getting back into the genre then. You said you were in your 20s, you were like, "Holy shit, I like horror. Horror is mine again. I've reclaimed it from this terrible ex." How did you start to manifest that in your life? Like what were the things that you were doing that were allowing you to connect with the genre and the community that you would eventually become part of?
I had a lot of suddenly had a lot of free time, and this is back when we still rented movies from places. I'm a very old woman now. So I just started randomly renting movies. Like I missed Donnie Darko. Like I wasn't a part of when that came out. There was just weird like cult film touchstones that I was around for but didn't experience. So I had this like wild back catalog of things to kind of go through. And I did, and that helped me kind of define what I actually liked. And it did start my strange relationship with popular opinion versus what I actually thought was good, because I was being told these are the movies you should watch. This is what you should catch up on, and then I would watch some of them and be like, "Oh, I don't like this. This is good. You think this is good?" So I think that started me down my very opinionated road. And then met a person very dear to my heart who liked films as well, and we decided to start a print magazine in 2007 together for some reason, which was probably a bad idea, but I didn't know any better, so I did it anyways.
So, this magazine, would this happen to be Paris Cinema by any chance?
Yeah, but a little magazine by the name of Paracinema. I had worked on a magazine that no longer exists. That was very horror centric. It was very you know, black and red blood spatter, like extreme kind. Which is there's obviously places for that, but I didn't feel like that was the only way to approach horror films and genre cinema in general, and I didn't understand why there was such a need to like delineate horror from like other genres. So we decided to make paracinema kind of like a catch-all, like anything weird, gross, obscure, like that. Let's put it here, because I wanted to produce something with content that I wanted to read, and I couldn't really find it. And this was still, I mean, we were in the blogger days back then, so you could find it, but I thought like, how cool would it be to kind of get it all together and like find all these different voices and put them together and create this thing. And I mean, I didn't know that it was going to be this huge formative experience, but it is. Pretty much everybody I know and all the contacts I have now are because of that still, which is amazing, I think.
And I mean, like, print itself is just, it's a medium that, yes, it is dying. Yes, it's almost dead at this point. It's something that is becoming very bygone because we have the internet. But the internet is so impersonal in ways that I think print, it just, you can hold something. It's tangible. It's a physical copy. And it's so much more to me when I read my, let's, for example, like if I have a byline in a Fangoria magazine, which happens like once a year, but still that once a year byline means so much more than the churn and burn of online stuff that could like vanish in a second, or like someone could just delete and that article's gone. But there's just something about being in print, and like I 100%, it's like it's an endeavor that is, well, who would do that? That's crazy. But to have a magazine to hold it is just so much better.
Yeah, I agree. I enjoy it.
I'm curious a little bit too when you're talking about kind of creating a magazine in 2007, and there are horror magazines, of course, that have never stopped running. Stuff like
Hmm.
Fangoria that has died and been reborn and came back again. There's stuff that have been around for a bit now, and I think are sort of in that survival state of like Rue Morgue magazine, which we kind of expect to survive. And there's other stuff that's kind of popped up and come down. But I'm curious, like in 2007, when, really before what we think of as the standard set of social media channels and the way that we use them, how are you identifying writers? How are you pulling people into this community? How are you giving a platform to folks? Because you couldn't just pop on Twitter and be like, let me search for a movie that I want somebody to write about. Holy shit, somebody like Mary Beth McAndrews wrote a really killer piece about this. I bet she has something to say about this. Let me DM her, blah, blah, blah. Like, how did you do that in the quote unquote old days?
I feel like we were really lucky. And I don't have a great answer for this because a lot of it was, I'm undercutting myself a little bit. A lot of it was luck, but a lot of it was just weird hustle. Like, we did Craigslist ads, and that is how we found you, Matthew. Um, we found a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people through Craigslist, which I guess at the time was an imperfect but like viable way to get gig work still. I mean, it's definitely not now, obviously, but back in the old days, it was a thing. And we had a decent MySpace presence, but MySpace didn't really have the tools, especially for like a print movie magazine, to really get your name out there. But I mean, we tried, we used it as best we could, and I think that got us some traction as well. um, and then I think after a while, there was a lot of word of mouth. We became friends with a couple podcasts, some of which are still running remarkably. But we got in with them, and that generated interest. And there was kind of a groundswell, a little one, but I mean, it still was ground swelling. So it kind of was organic, and I think most good things are organic. You kind of can't force things to happen if they're not gonna sometimes. And I really truly feel like, again, if I had known what I knew about print and where it was headed and what a silly endeavor that it could potentially be, I probably wouldn't have done it. But that being said, it all worked out for about a decade. I couldn't have asked for more.
Well, I want to ask about kind of the aftermath of that too, because unfortunately, R.I.P. Fangoria died before its time, and then I wanted it to live forever. But for all the reasons we've sort of hinted at here, it's tough out there to be a print publication. How did you take how did you react or evolve from that point where you had something that had its own sub community, right? Like so much of horror is about us attaching ourselves to other communities that already exist. How did you kind of come down from the aftermath of having created a community that had attachments and sort of say, how am I going to integrate and navigate with these folks going forward?
And also by Fangoria, you mean Paracinema,
Did I
correct,
say
Matt?
Fangoria? Okay,
You
I
did.
meant Cinema. I'll say Rue Morgue in here too to just kind of mix all the ones. I'll say Scream magazine just to like make sure that everybody's getting an equal amount of airtime in my Tuesday night crazy brain.
Oh,
So,
scream.
Christine, that question,
But
but to note, Fangoria is still very alive. Paracinema, unfortunately, is
is
dead, and
dead.
that's the one we're talking about.
Well, it was a choice. Talking about organic things, it wasn't really an organic choice. It was put to bed way before I think it was done. I was in a relationship with the person I was working on it with, and that relationship ended, and thus the magazine ended. There was really no interest in doing it separately, and I get that. And I think that's probably for the best. I definitely think that it could have gone a lot further. It pushed me out of my comfort zones in a lot of ways that I think were good, but also I don't think anybody should have to wear that many hats, especially if it makes them uncomfortable, if it's something that they're truly not good at. And there were aspects of it that I was not good at. But thankfully, everyone that I had made friends with and become close with, like become a family with, people weren't just tossing me out because it was done. Like people were really, and of course, some people were shed because you were no longer an entity. You were just a person with nothing to really offer them. But I think the people
Mm-hmm.
that I cared about were still there and are still there. Again, shockingly, it's a real testament to the relationships that were built, and it was an amazing time. And some magazines look like that design now, so I mean, I'm not saying anybody stole anything, but also pretty influential. That's all. I think it's awesome that that's how we met, and technically that's how I met Donato as well, kind of in a roundabout way. So
I was gonna say we actually met beforehand at Fantastic Fest. I was drunk in karaoke, and you were there. It was like McCarg, Michael
yeah,
Hafner, and I remember you were there. So we actually met like I think my first year at Fantastic Fest, and that's how we started to just like talk and follow each other
yes.
online. Which was that funny thing when Monagle was like, "Oh yeah, like why don't we bring in Christine?" And I'm like, "Oh, like I know Christine." He's like, "Wait, why do you know Christine? Like I know Christine. You can't know
Well,
Christine." And I'm like, "Listen, man,
yeah,
No, no.
look, there's enough of me to go around. I snuck in, not snuck into Fantastic Fest. To say you sneak into Fantastic Fest, I didn't. I lived in Austin and I didn't get press ever. I never ever got approved for press for Fantastic Fest. So I just would go and see people. And Michael Hafner was my friend, and he was like, "Come hang out." And I was like, "I don't know any of these people," and he's like, "They're really nice." And you know what? They were really nice.
And Donato, I would never begrudge you the ability to be the little social butterfly that you are. You're like that guy in high school that wasn't like belonged to no social circle, and then because of that, accidentally blocked to all social circles. You're like that for the film community. So of course, I expect you to know folks because you weren't a jock, but you knew the jocks. You weren't a theater kid, but you knew the theater kids. That's where I position you socially.
yeah, but the difference is all those people suck. And the people I met now are cool. So it's nice. I actually have good friends this time, and I get to shed all the shitty ones from my hometown.
Wow, suck it, New Jersey high school system. Jeez. Gonna let that note linger a little bit. If you're a,
Yeah, just gonna
if
leave
you,
that there.
if you're a
Suck it.
hometown friend of Matt Donato and you're listening to the show, it's time for him to tell you what he really thinks about you.
No, no, no. They know who
Okay.
they are. It is not every one of them. I still have
If
plenty of
you,
great
if you're
friends, but
somebody that
it is.
didn't
But
like Matt Donato growing up and you're listening to the show, can I ask why? Will you write us at certifiedforgotten@gmail.com and explain why you're listening to the show right now? Because I'd love to know.
That's a strange choice.
yeah, actually, I would too. And also, I will respond. I'll respond with a gift too, and it'll be
All
great.
right. Anyways, enough about your high school. We've got more questions for Christine. Um, so my question, Christine, I think my last question that I want to ask you is kind of talking about your relationship to the horror community now. I mean, there was a period there when we were talking. You didn't write a lot of film criticism anymore. You kind of that was something that you had sort of stopped doing, and you were gracious enough to accept our offer to come back and work with some of our writers on a regular basis at Certified Forgotten. Like Donato said in his intro, you are now published in Grimm magazine. You continue to write fiction on your own side, but it sort of feels like you're I don't want to say stepping back into, but you're dabbling a little bit with some of these things you hadn't done in a minute. Where do you feel you are in relationship and connected to the horror community these days?
I like to be a calm, supporting presence. I did the grind, as they say, for about a decade, where all I did was write and edit and watch movies, and it burnt me out in a really profound way. And it was hard emotionally too, because I mean, not that anything's changed, but really, truly, the amount of times that I've been told awful, awful things just because someone didn't like my opinion made it hard for me to say my opinion on the internet. So I think I like to write. I prefer to write fiction. I like to squawk my movie opinions loudly and sometimes write them down. But I really do like editing, and I really like helping people clarify and hone their ideas and their thoughts. I think that that's probably what I'm better suited for. Um, if anything, the magazine taught me that I should maybe seek out the things that I like to do instead of just forcing myself to do everything, even if I don't like it. And sometimes I don't like writing on the internet. So I would rather read and retweet and tell somebody how great I think their writing is and buy their books or something that feels better to me, and I feel like I'm still engaged to a certain degree, because I would love it if people read my stuff and told me how good they thought it was. So I'm just trying to like pay that forward. Hey, your writing's great, thanks, kind of thing.
I like that. I like that that's where you were because I that really defines kind of the relationship that I think I had with you from the beginning was, you were an excellent editor, but you were also somebody that liked my writing at a time where nobody else nobody else even know who I was. And so your attitude was always like, hey, this is good, you should do more of this. And it was just a very, at my best, I felt very supported, and I felt like I had a really good home with you as my editor. So the fact that I have an opportunity now, with my good buddy Matt Donato, to kind of replicate that experience for some other writers that are coming up through the ranks at Certified Forgotten, that to me is like, that's real fucking cool. Like that's a good point of pride, that I can take the experience that you gave me and have give you an opportunity to give those to other writers too.
No, it means a lot to me too because I want to do that and that's what I like to do. And I really truly appreciate that you identified that and wanted to include me. Um, Sometimes it feels like if you don't have anything truly tangible to offer, people don't want you at the table. So I appreciate you offering me a place at the table.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you like editing because that's a good thing because we hired you to do
Yeah.
that. So I'm happy to hear that you're very, very encouraging and very happy about editing. So that, not that our decision was hard, but this definitely makes it a
Yeah.
lot
And
easier.
I
we're
mean,
pretty, we're okay. I think we're okay at editing, but there's a lot of stuff that we just, we could use the help. I think Donato and I have been spent, you kind of, I mean, you kind of inferred this, right? When you were talking earlier, I think we spent so much time working for publications that don't really have an editorial process, that we're just sort of used to like releasing writing, having it all changed to meet whatever SEO or whatever needs that are required, and then just move on to the next project. And when you do editing well, you give in an ideal world, you give writers an opportunity to actually look at feedback, respond to feedback, make adjustments based on feedback. And it's not just this pipeline where you're basically like, okay, you gave me the piece, I make the changes that need to be made, I publish it. You never see that interim process. It's that interim process where people get better. And so that's the thing that I think that you're so excellent at, that Donato and I are still improving our skill set at, and makes, hopefully for our writers, an interesting experience.
yeah, here's hoping. I once wrote an article about The Sentinel, that fantastic movie about the gates of hell and the building in Brooklyn. I wrote a beautiful article that I was extremely happy with, and then sent it off. And when I read it online, it was completely rewritten to the point where I don't even know why I bothered to do it, and I never got any explanation as to why. So I don't ever want to do that to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, just as Matt said, we kind of do live in a time where the editorial process has shifted, we'll
Yeah,
say. And by shifted, I mean it doesn't exist in a lot of places. And that's not us tooting our horn by any means. But again, it is what Monaco said, where we just want to offer something where, especially if we're going to try to work with up and coming writers, we want to give you feedback and we want to help you, see the piece that we know you can write. And we want to get that out of you. And that's not a bad thing. It's not that you are a quote unquote bad writer. It's that, no, we want to see like, then we want to push you and see what you can do next. It's like, here, that's a great first draft. Let's see what you can do with it to a different level, where other sites, and I can tell you without naming names, a few people have written to us or written for us, and they are names that you have read many other places. And when they say, yeah, you were the first time I got notes, it's like,
yeah.
interesting. And it's just a byproduct of the system. Listen, I know that. I know the sites that do and don't, and I know why they do and don't. It's just a churn thing at sometimes, and there's a reason they're on top, and there's a reason others aren't. So we know we'll never be on the top, so at least we can do something
Yeah,
editorially.
that's our tagline is a publication: Certified Forgotten will never be first.
Look, know yourselves.
There's a reason Forgotten's in the title.
It's good to know. But it's nice to never have to worry about, like, we have to get this up by the end of the day because this movie's premiering. Nope, we'll never run new releases. Huzzah for us. Oh, speaking of not new releases, actually, this is a perfect segue into today's film. So we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we're gonna we're gonna go explore some direct to video love from not that long ago. We'll be right back. Hey, we're going to take a break from this episode to tell you a few things. First and foremost, we're going to tell you that we could not, would not, should not do the show without your support. So thank you to all of our patrons and the people that support us with a click, with a share, with a like. All of that goes a long way. Being part of one of our patrons, you actually get to put words in Matt Donato's mouth. That's like the whole thing. That's the fun part about participating in these bumpers and getting Matt to be your little ventriloquist doll. You move your hands and he says whatever you're thinking. So Donato, what have you lined up for this week?
I might need to rethink this tier after you just described it like that. But in any case, while we still have me acting like your puppet, apparently, first up, we have Mr. Ian, and he's going to ask me to read some lyrics. I won't be afraid of you. I won't lie and beg for today. Right away, no fun and games for you. I don't need to sacrifice my day, not this way. That is Serge Tankian from System of a Down, and that is Ian's wish, hoping for more System of a Down music one day. But we have had recent System of a Down music, so let's hope for even more of that.
Yeah, Ian, you've had 2 songs in 15 years. Like, you want more? Come on, man, chill. Like, that's a lot.
I miss my system so bad. And you, as we've been talking before, you reviewed the documentary that just came out, and you have some thoughts on that really quickly.
Yeah, it's good. It's political, but it's good. But if you like System of a Down, then you already know that they're political, but they're also good. So that should come as no surprise.
Should we go to our second one?
Lay it on me.
All right, this one is coming from Mr. Corey, and Mr. Corey likes to ask us questions, and this is no different. So, first off, well, god damn it. All right, first off, I, Matt Donato, do solemnly swear that breakfast food is amazing to have any time of day, but especially at dinner. End quote. I was forced to read that by Corey. And now the question. So, speaking of things that make you sick, what really gets you in horror movies? Is there anything that will make you hide your eyes a little bit, gag a little bit, eat, et cetera, et cetera? So, Monagle?
I love this question because sometimes I'm accidentally reminded that we run a horror film podcast. Donato knows this about me. I do not do well with torture. There's a laundry list of French extremity films that I have not watched, and I'm struggling to ever make the time to watch because I know how violent. So basically, any prolonged sequences of abuse, of torture, make my skin crawl. And it doesn't mean that those aren't great movies and that I don't like it. It's just like my stomach drops. I mean, you guys probably listened to the Poughkeepsie Tapes episode. Like, had a really, really hard time with that, and that wasn't even anything. That was fucking nothing. So that's what gets me. Donato, how about you, man?
I mean, like, I'm very specific. It is torture for me, but it's 2 very specific actions, I guess I would say. And I mean, I've eaten dinner during the worst horror movies. I think as a horror movie critic, you just kind of, you become immune to the fact that you're going to try to squeeze dinner time in during a screener, and that screener is probably going to be horrific and grotesque and gory in some ways. So, like, I've eaten dinner to most of the Saw movies and anything on that level, but 2 things continually get me. The first one is fingernails. Once, like, a fingernail is starting to get pulled off and they do that elongated cut right on the fingernail and you watch it get torn off, that gives me the heebie-jeebies, and it makes me, like, literally crawl into my own skin. Number 2 is just straight up vomiting. And I know that's probably a universal thing, but I just don't like seeing people vomit. So when that happens on screen, and watching the Haunters doc where they take you in McCamey Manor, and this lunatic running this quote unquote haunted attraction who was making, like, force feeding people these disgusting things, they would throw up, and then he would force feed that stuff back to them. That was probably the most grossed out I've ever been watching something, and, like, the closest I've ever come to actually replicating that myself.
Yeah, if you have to sign a waiver to be in a haunted house, I mean, like, just no. Pass. Hard pass.
No. And
I don't even want to watch the movie about it.
And that, well, the movie is very good about it because it draws a line between people like the ones who run McCamey Manor and why they are kind of not liked in the community, and the versus effect. You know, what is a good haunt? What is a bad haunt? So I do suggest Haunters: The Art of the Scare as a documentary, but be warned, you will see some things that will shake you to your core because it's all fucking real.
Well, on that note, Donato, I believe you have a Chipotle burrito to go eat, so have fun with that, friend.
We both have South by movies to unbury ourselves from, I guess I would say.
Yeah, that's very, very true. All right, well, back to the episode. Thank you all. Hey, welcome back. So, today's film, again, you saw it, the episode title, no surprises here, is Population 436. It is a 2006 release from director Michelle McLaurin, who you know from basically any television show that was any good from the last 10 years. It stars Jeremy Sisto, and we're going to talk about Jeremy Sisto. It also stars Fred Durst, which I did not realize until the closing credits, because that's the kind of Limp Bizkit fan I'm not. And it is a film about a census taker who travels to a very small town, the almost too perfect town of Rockwell Falls in North Dakota to try and kind of figure out why there's a bit of a discrepancy in the town census records. It seems that every single decade, every single time they run the census, the population is exactly 436. So as Jeremy Sisto's character gets to know the townsfolk, a little bit of Shirley Jackson shit starts to happen. I'll just put it that way, and it builds to the kind of ending you could really only have in a DVD. In the like early 2000, like mid to early 2000 to 2010 era. The kind of like nobody's watching, so we'll do what we want kind of ending, and we're going to talk about that too. There's probably a lot more we can say about the film by way of introduction. I'm not going to. I want to get right into the conversation because I remember this movie. I rented this movie,
No.
and I'm really excited to talk about it with Christine. So, Christine, first question. We gave you your pick of anything that you could think of that was 5 or fewer reviews. You picked this. You picked this one, and I fucking love that choice. But tell me why this is the movie that came to mind for you.
Well, I'm going to tell you that it's a lot harder to find a movie with that criteria than you might think. I had a really hard time with it, and I kept coming back to this for some reason. I saw Population 436, I don't know, in like 2010 or something. I don't know why I saw it. I don't know where I saw it, but I'm pretty sure I watched it because Fred Durst was in it. And it just never left my brain, and I think you really hit it when you said it's got Shirley Jackson energy, because have either of you ever seen the made for TV Lottery with Dan Cortez in it? You
Mm-mm.
should you should
No,
if
I
you
have not.
haven't. It's very that. It's very Dan Cortez, maybe Kerry Russell, maybe I just made that up. But like a made for TV on the cheap version of the lottery, but like with the census. And there's like little bits of folk horror in it, I guess, like maybe a little bit, maybe I'm reaching, but it felt like that. And there's like it's like a great episode of the Twilight Zone, like, oh, that great episode where the census taker, yeah. But I mean, it's not a perfect film by any means, but it ticks a lot of boxes for me.
Also, I would not short sell the folk horror because the first thing that I put it towards is basically like, to me it felt like The Wicker Man meets The Lottery. Like that was everything in my head that I came up with, because so much of the beginning is Sisto's character. He's this Chicagoan who's
Hmm,
there
hmm.
to figure out the census, blah blah blah, crack the case. But all the stuff he's going around this town, it really feels Wicker Man esque in the sense that the townsfolk are so accommodating and open, and you have the coy lines about like, "Oh, you're never leaving," from like the nice old lady, and like Sisto's like, "Wait, what?" And like he just keeps moving forward because it doesn't click until about half the movie. So I wouldn't short sell that. I think there's definitely some like Wicker Man folk horror vibes going on here.
Yeah, I kind of feel like there's almost like a it it's a good example of how you do that kind of thing right? Because like a lot of movies try and do the it's too perfect to be true kind of thing, and they can't quite calibrate how much to wink, right? Like the characters are a little too creepy, like too overtly creepy, and the audience doesn't work, or they're like it's too low key, and so you kind of something like almost The Village, where when the reveal does happen, it felt at the time, and I know we're in the process of kind of rediscovering and reclaiming that one, but it felt at the time like it was a bit out of left field. So you have to sort of walk a little bit of a fine line where you're like, when reveals happen, you're like, oh, I saw this coming, but also, okay, I like that worked for me. And I think that's one thing the Population 436 does really well is from the get go, it is, what kind of a movie this is because it has like giant bloody letters on the cover. Like this is 2006, VHS DVD market. Like you're not gonna get away from being what this movie is. You're hoping to hook people on the video shelf, but at the same time, like it's able to walk that line. It wants to be funny and coy and a little creepy, but not too creepy, and it does that with a much steadier hand than I think any DV video has any right to expect.
It's also a lot more subdued than things coming out at that time, especially things that did hit uh, video, and that was still relatively new. Like, I mean, obviously things have always gone direct to video, but it wasn't viable product. Wasn't always going direct to video. People weren't like, oh,
Mhm.
this thing I've never heard of, I'll check out and give it a chance. And so you got a lot of like, the hyper violent and the nasty stuff kind of got released that way. So it was cool to see something that was like a little bit more thoughtful, and subdued, and just a story. I personally wish it had been weirder. I think it could have gone weirder with it, but if that was the line they needed to walk and they kept the weirdness pulled back, then that's fine. I think what we ended up with worked.
And yeah, if we're talking about 2006, the D2 DVD, or I don't, how do you say that? D to TV?
D to DVD, D to DVD, D
Yeah,
to
whatever.
DVD,
You
D
know,
to DVD.
the video. You're gonna break my brain. Anyway, the video market. I mean, if we're talking about 2006, that's when I maybe was streaming even happening at that point in the sense of just video on demand rentals. Like, is that too early
It
for
feels a
that?
smidge too early. Yeah, it feels like streaming was a few years after that, I think. Though I probably should
Yeah.
have prepared for that beforehand. So let's say that I'm right because I'm an authority figure and it was a few years
No,
afterwards.
that sounds about right because when we think of things that go direct to video, when we think of things that go video on demand, it's gotten better over time, but it still has a stigma because when that first started, it was very bottom of the barrel. The things that were coming straight to video were the things that belonged straight to video, and there are reasons that they came there. And I 100% believe that, like, I knew nothing about this movie coming into today's viewing because at that early time, I wasn't as big a cinephile, whatever you want to call what we are. And those kind of movies, I did steer clear of. It's like, all right, it was going straight to video. There's a reason it is. I'm not going to really gamble on it. And I have since corrected my ways and probably overcorrected in many ways. But
Yes.
I can 100% see population 4 through 6. You know, I can see this coming out, and it's that DT direct to video instance where do we need to see this? Why is this happening? And I think if that's true, this is one of like the earliest instances where it's like, oh, there is stuff coming out straight to video that might be worth our time.
Yeah, and I remember this being, I mean, I in my memory, right? And like when we look back on stuff, our brain is the greatest editor. It condenses and finds patterns that weren't there and all the good stuff that we already know. But I feel like every fucking movie around this time period had Jeremy Sisto, and that's not a knock. Like I feel like there's an article or a window in time where Jeremy Sisto was like the king of this tier of horror films. From everything with like he was in May, he was in a bunch of other stuff too. Wasn't he in May? He was in May, right?
He was in
Am I
May,
thinking
yeah.
of the right movie?
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
like all of this horror that was coming out that was kind of like bubbling below the surface of theatrical releases, whether it was stuff that went direct to video or stuff that like, you know, played at the IFC Center in downtown Manhattan and then went to video, like whatever that was, it all had Jeremy Sisto. And I kind of like, to me, in a weird kind of way, he was like the look and feel of he was the horror crux of independent and video on demand horror, right? Like he was talented but not super talented, but also like he could adjust himself and he could fit in a lot of different modes. And like he was just sort of the shaggy dog of indie horror. And like he always worked and stuff. But if you told me ahead of time, if you're like, we're gonna go see a Jeremy Sisto movie, I would be like, fuck yeah. I'd be like, okay, okay, sure, yeah, let's do that. And that was Donato to what you were saying about how it took you a while to warm up to it. That was always kind of my relationship with the direct-to-video horror market too. Is I was always like, okay, yeah, sure, let's do this. Like, why not? It's Thursday and I'm at Blockbuster, so fuck it, let's rent this instead of go out and see a movie because that's like 3 times more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, Sisto at the time too. If we're talking about Sisto himself, that's kind of around Wrong Turn. Wrong Turn is 2003. I adore him in Dead and Breakfast, which is 2004. And then like 2006 alone, he's in 3 independent, indie horror films in Population 436, Unknown, The Thirst. So yeah, this is what he's always done. And I do have that same instance whenever he pops up in a horror film because it's like expected and it doesn't throw me in any way because I'm like, oh, he's here. Of
Mm.
course he's here. Like, he's just in indie horror all the time. But serviceable is the word, and I don't mean that negatively in this instance. I think he's in all these direct-to-video horror films because he's kind of good at doing exactly the part that he's asked to do in these movies. I mean, he goes crazy here in a way that Jeremy Sisto does just fine. I'm not gonna say he does it extremely well, but Sisto's playing a part that Sisto does well.
He's the kind of actor that would star in every during this time period. If they were doing Stephen King, he would have been in like every Stephen King like miniseries adaptation ever. He's that guy. That's where he sits, and that's a compliment more than it's not a compliment. Sorry, Jeremy, if you're listening.
No, he was in a King adaptation, I believe. But his performance is exactly right. It's measured enough. Like and it's kind of a cliche to say like he knows what movie he's in, but he does. Like he's not swinging for the fences necessarily, but he's also not phoning it in. Like it's a good performance. Speaking of good performances though, how good was Fred Durst? I'm not kidding.
Fred Durst is the best performance in the film, and I'm fine
Hmm.
saying that.
He is. It's true.
All right, you guys are gonna have to talk a little bit about Fred Durst because my heart beats not for the Durst, and I want to know. I want to know. All right, Christine, you mentioned before that you probably saw this movie because it had Fred Durst. Like, do you recall what kind of a left turn this may or may not have been for him career wise? Now we're sort of used to him fucking around in like the independent genre movie scene because he's done some stuff since, and we're like, okay, I get it. But like, was this the draw at the time? Were people going out and being like, fuck yeah, the lead singer of Limp Bizkit's gonna be in this Jeremy Sisto movie, and like people were buying up the DVD in mass?
I probably not. I'm not like a super. I'm not a Durst head as they're called. They're not called that. No one calls them that. But I don't love Fred Durst by any means. He used to direct a lot of music videos, and I thought that was interesting. I used to be obsessed with who directed what music videos. I used to have like spreadsheets and lists. But so I thought that was cool, and so I kind of always thought he was cool and like low key handsome. So it always stuck out to me that he was in this strange movie doing like a good performance. Like he's empathetic, and like I mean to his credit, you didn't know it was him. He wasn't like screaming about I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, Nookie or whatever. I don't know those songs. But he wasn't like being obnoxious or putting on I mean he was acting. He was being in a movie and I thought that was cool. But when I was digging around for a movie to pick, I thought, what about Population 436? And I was like, Fred Durst is in that. Who else is in that movie? I could not pull that it was Jeremy Sisto. So yeah, he's the shining light in this movie for me.
I mean, I will say I don't consider myself a Durst head, as they're
It's
not
catching
called,
on.
but as
We're
I will
doing
now.
it.
Yeah, it's gonna catch on. We're doing it. We're making Durst head's gonna be a thing. But I mean, I picked him out pretty easily. I guess I do listen to more Limp Bizkit than I'd like to admit, and I have no problem saying I kind of grew up listening to him in a way. I was an angsty white kid, and that's just what I did. And I again baffled, just like what you're saying, Christine. I'm baffled in the sense that he could give a performance that was legitimately like nuanced, and it had depth in the sense that it was the emotional part. Like this wasn't the part that goes crazy. This is the or Durst is playing the part that is kind of slighted in a scenario, and he's hurt and he's damaged and he's trying to figure out as the sheriff or lawman of this town, is he doing the right thing by upholding tradition, and is he doing all these right things, and like he is the contemplative role. And that sounds insane to say, like, why are we bringing Fred Durst in to do that? But he does that better than I think Sisto actually does losing himself. It becomes this weird thing of seeing them on screen, and Durst is the one that has this like stern face, and he's got this glare down that's perfect as he's looking at Sisto with a shotgun. And Sisto's the one panting and trying to like catch his breath, and he's the one going crazy, and you're like, how did we get here?
It's true. There's a moment in the movie where Fred Durst's character is lamenting, like, oh, is Jeremy Sisto's character my friend or not? And I was like, oh man, don't be sad. Like I just wanted everything to work out for him. He has a pivotal role. I mean, if you're gonna use like Twilight Zones as an analog, I mean, he got the omnipotent turncoat role, and he did really good with it. I mean, I don't know. I like him. This changed my mind many moons ago when I watched this the first time. I was like, that Fred Durst, nuanced guy. Yeah, so at least we have that.
And like what's funny is his career isn't like, it didn't take off, quote unquote. Like he's always stayed around music, and he's always stayed, like you said, stayed around music videos in that world. But this role didn't really push him to do any other dramatic roles afterwards. Like he was a bartender on House. He played a guy named Ledge in this movie called Play Dead. But after that, he went to directing, which was funny to me because he removed himself from in front of the camera and then he went behind the camera. He's making these movies like, okay, he's directing The Fanatic, which was his film 100%, and that is the crazy batshit movie that he didn't want to be a part of on camera. And then there's the Jesse Eisenberg film, which why is it escaping me right now? Um, but he does this really kind of heady drama with Jesse Eisenberg, and again, he doesn't go or he doesn't do the same thing where he plays this pivotal role on camera, and you're kind of like, but like you showed you could do it. Was this just him proving himself? I don't know. Like it's an interesting thing to think. Like, did he just challenge himself to do a part like this and see if he could do it? And when he did, Fred Durst is like, "All right, it's another thing off the checklist. I can just keep doing it all for the Nookie."
Done and done. Moving on. I mean, yeah, good for him.
Hollywood is basically just Fred Durst's bucket list at this point. All right, so we accept that Fred Durst is really good, and admittingly, yes, like I did not recognize him as Fred Durst until the closing credits, which is probably the best compliment I could give him, honestly. Um, and I want to talk a little bit about Michelle McLaurin in this too, because she's for people that are interested in film, she's brushed up against really big titles before. She's been rumored to direct or was contracted to direct Wonder Woman before she parted
Mhm.
ways because of creative differences, and of course that went to Patty Jenkins. She has directed, and I wasn't kidding. Like she has won Emmys for directing Breaking Bad. She directed episodes of Game of Thrones. Like if it is a big series that has existed, if it has captured the cultural zeitgeist at any point as a television show over the last 10 years, she has done an episode or two. But she's never done another film after this. And like watching this, there's choices, right? Like there's early 2000 choices. There's CGI fire. There's the weirdest CGI car accident, car crash that I've ever seen before in my entire life. That comes with the package a bit. But there's also confidence, and there's sort of clarity of how to move these characters through this central space in a way that makes sense. um, I as much as you can ever look at a direct to video title and say, oh, I get why this person went on to do great stuff later on. I get why this person went on to do great stuff later on. This movie looks and moves a lot smarter than you expect,
Mhm.
even among kind of like the Jeremy Sisto generation.
Oh, for sure, definitely. I mean, it feels like it's got a very TV aesthetic to it, and
Mhm.
I'm not gonna use that as a strike against it at all. I mean, some of the best stuff I've ever watched has been made for television. But it feels like a made for TV movie, but yeah, there's a competence to it, and there's a geography to it, and there's a sense of urgency to it, even though the story, is kind of thin. There are places where it feels like they're just kind of walking around, but she manages to keep it dynamic and interesting, and I really appreciate that. It's not a small thing. This could have easily fallen into this terrible repetitious loop where you're just going to the same places over and over again. There's just some she just managed to make it so fresh every time we went back and did it. And yeah, I mean the dream sequences didn't look fantastic, and there was some weird stuff.
Mm.
But like I don't know, I'll take this 100 times before some of the other garbage I watch.
Yeah, and we have to assume budget played
Hmm.
a part in some of the things because if we can't afford real fire, that's kind of an issue.
Mhm.
If we're just gonna light up that stands out to me. Fake fire, animated fire. So it was just one thing that really stood out to be of, oh right, this is a direct to video film. This is the kind of area we're still playing in. But other than that, it's pretty sound. It's pretty outside the effects, outside of what we might expect from a blockbuster, and what is the larger format television that we now see. And that's it is crazy to talk about how much television has evolved, and that's where kind of the budgets are in a lot of places now. But this still kind of just chugs right through. And again, I don't mean that as a derogatory thing. Like I know that could be inferred as, oh, it's just kind of doing what it has to, just going step by step. But for a direct to video movie to do that, and again to be surprised in that way by a film of that nature, yeah, it's exactly what we needed it to be.
There are three. When we watch movies like this, and I have to tell you that this is exactly the caliber of movie that I would have spent my entire high school years looking for. By then, of course, I was near the end of my college degree, but like this is the sort of stuff that I would have like loved and ingested over and over again. And sort of what I find myself, how I think of myself evaluating some kind of these like blockbuster finds is there a set piece that is there one set piece in the movie that I was like, ooh, I like that. that sometimes can be the difference between you being going back and remembering something and loving something and something that just sort of falls by the wayside. And I would argue that this movie has three unique set pieces, three unique moments that made me think like, oh, I like that. One is the hanging,
Hmm.
two is the 1950s family in the basement, and three is the field of discarded cars, which is by far the most expensive shot in the film from all the people who stopped in this town. Each of those ideas, like that's where the budget went. Those are the shots that they fought for. And when you hit those moments in the movie, you're like, I understand completely what you were trying to do here. Like this is where you should have saved your bullets. Well fucking done.
Oh, totally. That hanging is 100% what I remembered. 100%. And I was waiting for it the whole time. I for some reason thought it was a lot earlier in the movie, but it's still, even knowing it was coming, it was super effective and really well filmed and upsetting, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's not explicit, which I appreciate. They set the stage. They said this is what's going to happen in this idyllic town and it's going to make you feel a way. And then it did. It's just she's credited as co-executive producer on 46 episodes of the X Files. This feels like a really good episode of the X Files without Mulder and Scully in it. I don't know. I just really like it.
Yet again, I was gonna say, tying back to folkloric, I think of Midsommar. I
Mm-hmm.
think of the natural feel that Ari Aster was able to navigate as the grossness and the graphicness of his version of this, and his version of the brutality that happens in this small community that they're so used to. And the way that they don't flinch, and the way that Astor's world is entirely grim and graphic, like I just said, and yet his characters, outside the ones that rightfully are terrified, are just like, oh, it's another day in the life. And I felt that very much here during the hanging scene as well. It's done to a T, and it's done exactly how it's been led up to, I guess, is the way I'll say it. And just like you guys were saying before, we know something is coming. We know something's going to shake the system. It can't be just this, oh, don't worry, like everything's fine, and then the characters start dropping little lines to Jeremy Sisto, the, like I said before, the, oh, you're never getting out of here. You're like, okay, something's weird. So we're being led up to a moment that will grip us and that will rattle us to our core. And yeah, the hanging does that, because the minute they reveal the stage, it's great. It's behind the curtain, and the mayor's just like smiling, cheering. They all go through the prayer because religion is so important in this film. And all of a sudden they rip that curtain back, and I just see the woman again, the woman who is chosen, the May Queen, we'll say, in a certain way. The woman who's chosen is smiling with a noose around her neck, and she accepts her fate, and she says it's for the greater good, and then she drops. It's so good in that
And so
moment.
fast, like all of us, it does. There isn't any kind of the movie doesn't sort of linger a little bit. You can kind of you're like, what's behind the curtain? But as soon as you figure it out, the movie doesn't stop and like bask in that moment. There's not like a bunch of counter shots of Jeremy Sisto being like, no, don't do it. As she like takes 2 steps closer to the edge. No, don't do it. It's just like boom, done in the background, and it fucks you up a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's again one of the movie's strengths is that we get aligned with Sisto's character in a really interesting way. Like we really don't ever know much more than he does, and I think that's really
Hmm.
effective because he doesn't know what's going on. We're not sure what's going on, so neither of us have time to react, which is a really good way to play it. Don't undercut the tension that you've created. Don't do that. And I feel like maybe another filmmaker might have, just to wring that emotion out of Sisto when the strength really isn't his emotion. It's that where as clueless as he is. So I think it was really smart.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the hanging itself is a surprise, and again, not just the event, and not just the kind of atrocity, we'll call it, that happens, but the hanging, the way it happens, is a total surprise because, as you just said, we don't really know what's going on at that point. We know something is amiss. We know that someone has been chosen for a bigger purpose, but they're kind of just the leader of ceremonies. That is the way that it's kind of put out. So we know that's probably not great, but we also don't really know what's going to happen. And again, I mentioned the Wicker Man before, because I'm kind of thinking like, all right, are they going to burn this woman at the stake? Like, what are they going to do to her? So that reveal of the curtain flying back, and it is basically a gallows, is it's something that we're just not expecting at all. And then we see it, and it just makes total sense. But it's still a moment of shock and kind of our expectations are paid off at the same time. So like there's the surprise, but also that yeah, that makes sense. And the quickness is
Mhm.
what doesn't let us ever align. Like the quickness is the way that the film makes its biggest impact because you don't get to catch your breath. You don't get to catch up. There's no moment of like, oh, okay, so here's what's gonna happen. I can now rationalize this. Like, nope, it just happens right in front of you, and you're trying to figure it all out as everything washes over like in waves
Yeah,
almost.
and there's for these scenes and a lot of other films, there would be a ton of pageantry around that moment, right? Like the Wicker scene death or assumed death. I mean, technically, I guess maybe he could live. The Wicker scene is it takes forever, right? Because they process to the field, and he's yelling the whole time, and like they're singing, and it's like this thing that the community is super reverent about, and like there's a lot of pageantry about it. And I love the simplicity of it. The fact that they're just like, it's time. All right, let's get back to the show. Right? Like there isn't this pageantry. There isn't this sense of religious rigor or ritual around this moment. It's just sort of like she was selected, ka-chunk, and then she's gone. And in a weird kind of way, the fact that that undercuts it so much, we're used to horror that like revels in the gross bits. To go all the way back to what Christine was saying with direct to video before, we're used to horror movies that are like somebody's going to die and it's going to happen slow and we're going to let you watch it. We were like, oh great, this is going to be like the kill. This is going to be the moment that people are going to be like, oh, you got to fucking see population 436, it's gnarly. And they're just like, she's dead, and then they move right along, and that suddenness of it works almost in sort of like as the anti. Like I like the suddenness of this more than I like the drawn out death in Midsummer, because it informs. I feel like I understand the community
Hmm.
in population 436 better than I do like all of the stuff that's happening in Midsummer is for the benefit of us, the audience, not for the benefit of the community itself. And I feel like I understand the community in population 436 better because of how like you know quick and unceremonious it is. It's an interesting. It makes me want to write about those two scenes in comparison to each other because it's such an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, why would they all make a big deal out of it if this happens all the time? And it has to happen all the
Exactly.
time for them to keep the population at, spoiler alert, 436. They have to constantly.
Christine, you ruined the end of the movie.
Well, it's all right there, everyone. But they have to be constantly doing this. So why would it doesn't make any sense. It's like going to the grocery store. Like why would they be like, "Oh, we're doing this bit." No. And they show her going around and like shaking hands and being happy and excited in the background. Like we see them pick her
Mhm.
name. We get all of it. I mean, it's not like it springs forth from nowhere. But of course, I mean, no, why would they care? This is their life. This is how they live. Why would they wouldn't make a big deal out of it, so the movie shouldn't. It's really, you know what? I like this movie more the more we're talking about it. I've given it credit. I'm giving it more now.
Agreed. Yeah, me too.
And also the little surprise that they leave still is the fact that the hanging comes first, and then we get I was going to say crazy, but the lobotomized in a way family in the prison after that. And I think that's a really good way of kind of setting it up chronologically, because if we did get the family in the prison who is mentioned during the film, there's a family in the prison. They have basically had their minds poisoned, I guess we'll say, in a way. I know it's like lobotomy science, but their minds have basically been turned to the sense that the community is where they need to be. They will no longer leave it. And well, the community themselves will do anything to keep you there. So seeing that family in the prison and seeing them so happy and seeing that moment of being ripped out of reality, because it does not feel realistic, because Jeremy Sisto at this point has seen the hanging. He is frantic. He is running around like crazy. And then he finds this family in the prison, like basically in the basement, and they feel very not realistic, but that's also normal. I don't know. I just think it's really smart to do that second, because if you did that scene first where Sisto finds the family in the prison, I don't think the hanging has as much impact. I think that would have undercut the sense of us waiting for the big reveal of grimness, and seeing that family first would have just been a little bit like, oh, so this is going to get real weird after this. Like the hanging being the first real weird quote unquote part is what gives it a lot of its punch at the end.
Yeah,
And
I think
you brought up the
this
end,
might have been a
so
really good
uh,
script. Sorry. I think this script was good. I don't know. The more I think about it, the writing was really intentional. So, yeah.
yeah. Well, I'm gonna springboard off of what Donato was saying, Christine, and ask you. kind of as our last conversation about the film too, that ending. Um, how do you, like, again, we all know that, M. Night Shyamalan fever, rushed across the nation. We were all looking for endings that kind of left us thinking, "Oh, I didn't see that coming." Um, but I am particularly enamored with how this film sets up its ending. So I want to know what you thought revisiting this for the first time in a minute, Christine. How'd you feel about the ending?
I had forgotten how it ends. I thought it was a lot more open and unclear, but I feel like it ties up really nicely, while also kind of leaving it ominously open, if that makes any sense. Like this town is going to keep doing what they're doing, but our story, with Jeremy Sisto is done. I think that's great. And for me, that's the most folk horror thing about it is the town remains undisturbed to a certain degree. They are going to
Hmm.
continue to exist the way they always had, and outside forces aren't going to stop that. I think it worked really really well as opposed to like the million other ways it could have ended. Jeremy Sisto could have burned the whole town down and everybody blah blah blah, or none of it was real. I thought it was uh, probably best case scenario for what they had set up.
And I think this drives home the fact that it is direct to video, and this is an ending that we really would only get in something that isn't as widely regarded, I would say, uh, or is the way I would say it in that sense, because it's a swing. It's a huge swing, and it's not the perfect little tie up that we get. It's or that we'd usually get in a mainstream horror film. It's not the quote unquote happy ending. It's in line with the film that we're given the whole time. And I mean, I think we've said this a few times going forward. Everything, the facts are right in front of us. It gives us everything we need to know to make its impact. And of course, I'm talking about the film and the script and everything about it. But seeing the ending and seeing the way that this movie really doesn't give a fuck, it's refreshing in a way. It's refreshing in a way. It's not perfect to that point. Let me again just state that there is definitely some flourishes of DTV quality throughout the film, and whatever it is, what it is. But seeing I see like seeing an ending that doesn't spoon feed. I like seeing an ending that doesn't just say, "All right, we told the story we need to tell. Sisto and a little child escape because they've beat the town," or we just don't need to know about this anymore. Nope, we're gonna show you that no matter how much you fight against the system, it's still gonna win. And sorry, more people are gonna get hung, and it's just gonna be a cycle of repetition, no matter how hard you try. And it's like, okay, thanks, movie.
Yeah, I made a slew of notes on my sheet of paper about why this film might be a little sadly relevant today in terms of social media and cults and indoctrinating early, and how if they get you early enough, you'll grow up believing and doing pretty much whatever you say. I don't think we need to have that conversation. Frankly, we've been having that conversation for like 8 years now. But I will say that I will never, the thing that you can do as a horror movie that will make me love you more than anything else in the world is introduce the idea of a religion and then pay it off so that you think the religion, the deity that the people are praying to or worshiping, might actually have interceded in the way that they believed. I love nothing more. Again, weird for an ex-Catholic, but I love nothing more than the idea that like they were right all along. Their God is the right God, and he or she or it is looking out for them. That's fun. That's so much fun, and the fact that they went there at the end, it was just an absolute delight for me.
I agree.
Well, last question then, about this film before we say our fond goodbyes. We cannot be members 437, 438, and 439 of population 436. We always talk about on this show the fact that these films are forgotten for a reason, right? They have five or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and while that's not always a clear indication of how many people reviewed it or who's talking about it, it usually serves as good shorthand for the fact that these films are a little bit on the lost side. Um, Thankfully, this film is more accessible than most because it's available on Tubi TV, which is by far the best and most fun of all the streaming platforms. But Christine, I want to ask you our standard question: how does this movie get reclaimed? Like, how does this movie become part of the conversation? Is this a scenario where in 20 years this will be considered a classic of the early 2000s horror? And if so, how does it get there?
I wish. I just think people need to start. talking about it, but they need to know it exists first. So it's good that it's available on something like Tubi, because that gives people an opportunity to actually look at it. And I think there's a chance with this movie because of its accessibility, and also because it's got a weird hook, like Fred Durst. That's a weird thing to tell somebody to get them to watch a movie, even though he's not doing Fred Durst like shit in it. It's a lot quieter than than maybe, his music career. But I think there's a lot there for people to latch onto, and I think Donato said it. Maybe it was you, Matthew. I'm not sure. Somebody said talk about this in relation to Midsummer, or the death scene in that. Like, I think there's a lot of parallels to be drawn about how this successfully handled things that other more popular films might have handled just as well, or maybe not as well. And I recently watched every single episode of Fear Itself and Masters of Horror, and this is so much better than all of those. And yet people don't know what this is. I would like people to know what this is. So I mean, if you guys have any uh, advice other than this podcast and screaming about it from Twitter, let me know.
Well, it was actually a very funny thing because I tweet out when I watch a film. I just do a dumb little tweet that says like I'm watching this because I don't know if it's a new movie, it puts it on people's radar. If it's an old movie, I get to hear what other people think about it. And this is another one of those times where I tweeted today that I'm watching Population 436 and I'm expecting zero engagement and I expect no one to even know what this movie is. And all of a sudden, like a few people are responding, going, "Oh my god, like is this streaming somewhere again? Like can I watch it again?" And other people saying like, "Oh, I loved this movie when I saw it back then. Like that's so cool." And it's something that I'll bring up again going back to my previous conversation. I never would have found at the time because at the time I was using things like Rotten Tomatoes. At the time, I was entrenched in my film upbringing in the way that I had not I hadn't gotten to the point that I'm at yet. And I've said that already. So like my viewing habits were very different then. So it fell to the wayside. And that's why I think a lot of films like Population 436, the straight to video, the ones that were a little weirder, and the ones that, critics at the time didn't like horror, or sorry, the critics on Rotten Tomatoes at the time didn't really love horror. So to make them watch a direct to video one is like they were barely even like wanting to watch the mainstream ones, and when they were tearing them apart. So it just gets lost because no one's talking about it critically, no one's championing it this way, and all of a sudden it just gets brushed under the rug because well, it's direct to video in the time that direct to video was a more than a stigma. It was just something no one wanted. It was the Walmart dollar bin. And as much as I learned to love that bin, and as much as I've learned to find a lot of weird curio titles through there and really come to champion them, you know, that kind of appreciation of film, I don't even think was around at that point. So the internet has found a way to make things relevant again. The internet has found a way to dig up films from the past and do it through streaming. So the fact that this is on Tubi, I think that's the best shot it has. And once again, I found it because of this podcast and just talking to you guys. Because number one, Christine, you made me watch it. But number two, when you brought it up, I was looking through Tubi for an article, and I was literally like scrolling through it to try to find streaming recs, just because it's one of my columns. And all of a sudden, I'm like, "Holy shit! There's Population 436." If I hadn't known you were bringing it to the podcast, I would have scrolled right on by, and that's just how it would have happened. But just from you saying it, all of a sudden, like I was like, oh my god, it's on Tubi. It's available to everyone. So then I finally watched it. I don't know. I think word of mouth is the only way this one goes, but luckily the word of mouth can work because the tools are there. It's right there for everyone. So I'm hoping that we are as influential as we think we are.
Yeah, and I'll end that by saying that I like Midsummer a lot. I don't like Hereditary, so I'm confused by why I like Midsummer so much.
I'm the exact
But
opposite.
oh,
We
boo,
we need to
boo.
talk about that someday.
We're gonna take that to DMs. But the thing is that like if you asked me to summarize how I feel about Population 36, I would say I'm a producer. I have $10 million. I can fund one Midsummer or 10 Population 436. I'm fucking doing 10 of these movies. Like I am like it is there's so much there. Like give people $1 million and be like get the best actor you can get and go do something that, feels fun and is indicative of the kind of film that you want to make. I mean, I am like in the middle of empty man renaissance over here. I love the movies that are earnest and just doing the most they can with what they have. And there is always going to be a place for the director driven, the auteur driven stuff like Midsummer, but I will always love movies like Population 436 more. And maybe that means I'm just, the trash man, but it's what I love. It's what I love. I love it when a good movie that has no reason to be as good as it is that good, and you just want to tell people about it. So that's where I stand. Sorry, Ari Aster. I want to put Population 436 in the Criterion Collection.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I don't think Donato and I have that kind of.
I'll write a letter. You guys sign it. We'll send it off.
That's great.
There you go.
3 signatures.
Done and done.
They brought back Arrested Development twice. That should be. We can do a letter writing campaign too. All right. Well, that is our Population 436 conversation. Christine, I want to say thank you for everything, but today I want to say thank you for participating in this podcast. And I want to give you a chance to shout out some of the stuff that you're working on too. I know we blurbed you at the beginning, but what are some projects you have going on? What are some upcoming places that people can see you if they want to see your writing, your conversations, your voice, etc.?
Well, thank you for having me. But also, I am primarily on Twitter. It's xteen_makepeace. I also have a podcast that I do with one of my best friends, Emily, called The Feminine Critique. And I write lots of fiction. A great place to keep up with that is on Twitter, but you can find me at ChristineMakepeace.com. I have a very uncommon name, so I am easy to find.
Good SEO.
Yes, that's what my mom was thinking of when she had me.
I'm sure. I'm sure that was. Donato, my man, promote thyself.
You can find me at Donatobomb on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Instagram, and I will be posting all of my stuff there. I think just do that. Let's just make it easy this time, and Monagle, I'll let you do all the site stuff because you're so much better at that.
You go to our website, read the words that we give people money to put on there. I could do better. I can do better. You can find my writing on lots of different places, but let's say you follow me on Twitter as well, LabSplice, LABSPLICE. Please do check out certifiedforgotten.com. We're super proud of a lot of the content that we have up there. We're going to have more good content in the future. I know I say content. I'm sorry, I'm a marketer by day. That's not a knock. Like, the word content to me is a good word. So we have a lot of really good film criticism. We have a lot of really good journalism and writing on there that I would encourage you to check out. Christine worked on a piece not that long ago about what was The Autopsy of Jane Doe, which is one of her favorite pieces that she's ever read.
No.
What?
Nope.
What?
No, I said she worked on it.
I didn't write it.
Yeah, she didn't write it.
I thought you meant
I wish.
I was building to that. Christine worked on a piece. She helped edit and helped us publish a piece on The Autopsy of Jane Doe, which is really awesome. And I'm giving it a shout out because it's one of her favorite pieces that she's helped edit that's been on the site. So if you want to start somewhere good, start there because it's her favorite piece. It's one of the best pieces we published, etc. Is that okay, Donato? Did I do that well?
I just want to make sure that you knew she wrote about the Final Girls, which is why I was like, wait, I wanted to make sure you weren't attributing the wrong one.
I'm sorry. That is a better place. We should actually have people read the thing that you actually wrote, and not just the thing that you edited. Yes, Christine has a piece on Certified Forgotten about the Final Girls. You should do that too. My God,
this was a roller coaster.
It's been a long fucking year, man. I can't.
Can you tell how much we prepared for this one?
No one listens to my podcast. It's a fucking mess. I don't know who listens to it. I don't know where you can get it. I have no idea. That's my plug for myself.
What, you record it and you don't even know where you can get it?
I have no idea. I just show up.
That's amazing. Okay, so we ended great on this one. My apologies to Christine. We probably will have to bring you back on the show and do a better job with your intros and extras, next time. But yes, please visit the site. She has a hand in so many things, but she actually wrote the piece on the Final Girls. You should read that.
And also, wait, if you want to give Christine even more work on our website, why don't you check out our Patreon, where you can help support Certified Forgotten and the work that we do, because we cannot do it without the help of y'all. As much as me and Monagle put our money into it, the more you guys give us, the more we're going to put into the site and into the content itself. So the more money you give us, the more we can give it to Christine to edit things. Just think of it that way.
Sorry, guys. Usually I'm more on point at the end of these episodes, and today I am just all over the place. So give us your money so we can turn around and give it to Christine. This is a winning proposition for all three of us.
Look, I can always support that.
All right. Well, shit. So we're done. Christine, I want to say thank you again for joining us on the episode. We'll definitely have you back. You had another film you were thinking about too, so we won't mention that this time, but next time we'll see you again. Donato, please give us a sense of closure here, man. Give us something good to go out on.
I did it all for the noogie.
Perfect.